Good morning and welcome to the ABSA Business Day Supplier Development Dialogue entitled Our Economic Future, Where Are We Going as an Economy? I'm going to be introducing in a moment our very esteemed speakers. And before I do so, I just want to give a little bit of context. The COVID-19 pandemic is arguably the most severe economic impact that the globe has ever experienced. Around the world, people are suffering from a really extreme impact of the events, not only on a health perspective, but also for their economies. And a global recession has been predicted. In South Africa, of course, we sit in a particularly precarious situation because even prior to this COVID pandemic, we were facing reduced growth and possibly recession. So we're facing things that are unprecedented. The good thing, though, about any big impact like this is that it's an opportunity to look at things differently and to do things in a new normal. And so I'd like to introduce today this topic of where are we going, particularly with the concept of saying it's not going back to normal, but it's going back to the new normal, and what's that going to look like. So I'd first of all like to have a chat to Hilary Joffe. So Hilary is a contributing editor of the Business Times and Sunday Times, and is a former senior advisor at the Brunswick Group. She's also in the past been a consultant for Genesis Analytics and general manager and national spokesperson for Eskom. So Hilary's deep knowledge of business, finance, and policymaking is well known, and I'm really delighted to be able to speak to you today, Hilary. And what I'd like to really ask you is, what is your perception of the impact of COVID on the economy now, and where do you believe that we're going?
Catherine, before I talk about the economy, I have to just mention that I spent 2 decades or more at Business Day, since this is a Business Day event. Very happy decades they were too, yes. Look, one is speechless at the prospect of what is already happening to our economy. I mean, it's basically a catastrophe. It's a health disaster, but for South Africa, it's also an economic catastrophe. And we are, I suppose, working very hard as a country to try and balance the two, but there's no good solution to this one. We were in recession before the crisis. I think we're waiting for first quarter figures, but we had 3 negative quarters going into the crisis. As close as we get to an official forecast of what's going to happen to the economy is the Reserve Bank's latest forecast, which is -7% for this year. Now, keep in mind that in the depths of the financial crisis, South Africa was -1.5%. There is no precedent for shutting down entire economies, as the world has done. The global economy expected to shrink by -3%. Even on the Reserve Bank's figures, we don't get back to where we were before 2023 minimum. And the Reserve Bank's figures are beginning to look quite conservative, because some people, as you may know, have much, much worse forecasts. So Business for South Africa has a -14.5%, and certainly there are others in that region. What it looks like is going to depend on a couple of things. How quickly we come out of the lockdown and how effectively we sort of manage our way out, and how we balance the health imperative and the economic imperative. But also what we don't know yet is how much of this damage of the shutdown is permanent. Will businesses reopen? How high will the unemployment rate go? Estimates are anything from 33% to 50%. How much capacity will the economy lose, and therefore what would be its ability to recover? But there's no question that the picture is very, very gloomy. So if you like to look at it, the growth outlook is very bleak. As a country, we will come out of this much poorer. I hope we will come out of it with less of a health crisis than we expect, but we will come out of it having experienced both. We will also come out with much sharper inequality and unemployment. With all of that, what that means for our population and our economy and our society. And we will come out of it with our public finances in particularly poor shape. We had no space in the budget going into this crisis. We look even worse coming out of the crisis with tax revenue absolutely tanking. And obviously the extra spending we might want to do, we do need to do to try and at least provide some support through the crisis. How much and how fast we recover will depend on a couple of things. The one is how effectively what limited resources have gone into supporting people, the unemployment insurance fund, the credit schemes, which were the sort of payment holiday schemes, which both the banks and the government have put in place to try and keep businesses afloat through the shutdown. So how effectively what support package we do have in place reaches individuals and business. Also, how much attention we give to what we're going to do about our economy coming out of the crisis, and whether we're going to kind of start putting in place the reforms which we have talked about for so long but have done so little about. If there's one sort of bright spot, I think, in this rather bleak picture, it is that the crisis has really engendered a level of cooperation and consultation between government and business, but also with labor and other stakeholders, which we've really never seen in this country before. And I think that is a really positive sign, and it is something we can build on.
Wonderful. Thanks, Hilary. Yes, it certainly is a bleak picture, but I share your sentiment that the beauty of the crisis is that it forces people to think differently and act differently. And certainly those higher levels of cooperation do seem to be in evidence. And so let's hope that we can build on that. And then, so thank you. So, and then maybe over to you, Jacob. I'd like to introduce Jacob Maputa. He's the Chief Director of the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment and Special Economic Zones at the Department of Trade and Industry. So really delighted to welcome you, Jacob. And I'd really like to put it over to you to say, from DTI's perspective, what are the plans to reignite growth? And what role do you see the DTI playing in this new normal?
Well, thanks very much, and delighted to be part of the panel. And I just want to echo the sentiments of the previous speaker that the positive thing about this crisis is that it has brought us together even closer. It has brought government, private sector to really start working together and to focus more sharply on some of the things that we needed to prioritize. And I think one of those things that I believe is crucial is for us to work together to create an inclusive economy, to ensure that this economy that for many years has been skewed, that has for many years been characterized by high inequality. How do we ensure that we massively implement our transformation policies that will ensure that we create an inclusive economy that will benefit all our citizens? And this will require that various sectors of the economy focus on, things that might be called the low-hanging fruits, things that might be able to assist us to, in particular, bring on board small businesses. I think this is the perfect time, I believe, for us to start looking at the SMME sector, to start ensuring that our value chains that are very much highly concentrated start to focus on bringing in new players, small businesses that can be able to to create a partnership with the big players. So I believe that this present an opportunity really for us to start focusing on the SMME sectors, so that we start to create an inclusive economy. And for its part, government so far, we announced various packages to re-kickstart the economy. As you know, that the president announced the 500 billion COVID economic recovery package, with its various components to ensure that the economy can be recovered. There's also other measures, for example, the Reserve Bank reduction of the interest rate, bringing back into the economy up around estimated 80 billion. So there are various measures that government has put in place. As the DTI, we will continue to look at issues around localization, increasingly so that we ensure that we designate some of the products that we can be able to produce locally. And as I said, in particular, focusing on the small business sector, the SMME sector, the implementation of the some of the investment projects that were announced at the investment conference, the second investment conference last year, working with the private sector, so that we realize some of those objectives that were put forth. Continuing to implement the master plans of various sectors, in particular in manufacturing, whether it's automotive, the poultry, textile. We believe that the manufacturing sector as a whole is very important due to the high labor absorption capacity and other multipliers. So those will be there will be greater emphasis and focus on ensuring that we focus on those sectors and implementation. The Black Industrialist Program, the successes that we have achieved over the past 3 years, will continue to focus on that, ensuring that as part of this broader creation of inclusive economy, we support as many Black industrialists so that they can participate in the mainstream economy. But at the same time, ensuring that the established businesses do open up markets and opportunities for Black enterprises, and in particular for the small enterprises. So these are opportunity time for us to start working closely together, ensuring that we create an economy that will benefit all South Africans.
Thank you, Jacob. I mean, as a small business specialist myself, one of the things I'm really keen to find is the answers to localization, because the reality is that over the past decade or so, most of our manufacturing has moved to China. And one of the things that COVID has taught us is that when we have these huge global supply chains and we're dependent on external organizations or external economies in order for our own to sustain, the vital importance is to bring some manufacturing back into South Africa, and obviously then from a job creation point of view as well. But the key factor there is if we're not price competitive, if we're not efficient and effective, that's just lip service. And I think let's loop back to that conversation a little bit later in the discussion. But thank you very much for painting the picture from the DTI's perspective. Next, I'd like to speak to Gaylor Mombasson-Claire. And Gaylor has joined us from TIPS, and hasn't been an economist for many years, has a very illustrious career going back into his work with the United Nations Environment Programme, and has a particular focus on the renewables and green sector, which I find is particularly interesting in this context. And so, Gaylor, I'd like you to maybe pick up the conversation and build on what Jacob said. And what do you see for the possibility of maybe the renewable sector as being this opportunity to build local economies?
Yes, thank you, Catherine. And I think, as you point out, we have very much a unique opportunity at hand in the midst of this incredible crisis that we are into. The immediate response from government has, I think, rightly been focused on managing the social imperative. But we're now entering a phase where we are thinking about, okay, how can we recover in the medium term? And all economies around the world are doing that and channeling vast amounts of resources towards the economy and sectors. And I think we cannot afford, of course, to do business as usual and to go again towards traditional activities. If I try to summarize things, I think there are 5 key areas where we need to really emphasize investment and our resources. The first one is around what I call building the network infrastructures that can really unlock the economy. And that is really around building our smart systems around charging infrastructure for e-mobility, rail networks, smart water and sanitation systems, protecting our ecological infrastructure. This is all the networks which will, government takes responsibility for generally, but it unlocks a lot of other activities. The second area for me is really focusing on access to sustainable services. We have, as you pointed out in your introduction, really high level of poverty and inequality, which are going to be deepened and have been deepened by the crisis. So it is an opportunity to put an emphasis on providing sustainable services, again, through energy, through water, through sanitation, but also through public transport, for example. And these are jobs that cannot be outsourced to other countries. And these are very local jobs, which we can support. The third area, in my mind, is really to put an emphasis on the quick wins to unlock the investment from the private sector and households. Here, of course, the largest low-hanging fruit is the renewable energy sector. This is really a huge area where we could unlock very quickly through very simple policy and regulatory changes, unlock vast amount of money and investment. But it's also true in other areas like water, like waste management, or even more innovative routes like the green hydrogen, for example. The fourth area is around the fiscal reform. I think we cannot go business as usual in that front as well. We must seize the opportunity to relook at our administered prices around water and energy, for example, but also around our subsidy systems and where the money goes, what kind of companies, what kind of sectors we support. And I think we need to shift that towards local, small business, but also more sustainable activities and reducing notably fossil fuel subsidies. And the last area for me is really to build on local solutions and local activities. We have a vast of opportunity, which we can go back to in every sector. And I think, it's true in manufacturing, it's true in agriculture, but it's also true in, looking at our tourism industry, which is hard hit, and is also jobs that, you cannot move elsewhere. They are local, they have linkages for rural and economic development. And if we put a lot of emphasis on this, I think we could really get out stronger in the long run out of the crisis.
Thank you, Gaylor. Yes, I mean, I think the gems in our economic crown in the past certainly were automotive, mining, agriculture, and tourism. Automotive is under threat, I think, globally, and certainly it's a challenge here. Mining seems to be on decline. Agriculture, I read somewhere recently that agriculture is on decline. I find that surprising. I think it's a huge opportunity for growth. And then, of course, tourism. And tourism has to be one of the economies that is most hard hit through this crisis. So yeah, I mean, let me introduce you then to our next speaker, who's Mariette du Toit-Hembold. And so Mariette is very well known for her 10 years as CEO with Cape Town Tourism, and has really an illustrious career, not only as a local specialist in tourism and marketing, but extensive global experience as well. So Mariette, it's not just a South African crisis. What's happening in tourism, and what can you tell us?
Thank you, Kathy. The global industry is suffering unimaginable losses. And, who would have thought at the beginning of 2020 and a new decade, we were forecasting continued tourism growth, forecasting about 4 to 5% growth, despite tough economic times globally. 3-4 months down the line, and we've seen destinations looking like ghost towns, borders closed, and just in the first quarter, 60 to 80% already falling in tourism, and the estimated lost revenue close to $80 million just up until March. So of course, the scenarios at the moment is looking at some countries starting to open up their borders with huge restrictions, of course, and regulations as early July, and other destinations like us from an international travel perspective, probably only December, January, February, March next year. So for an industry, you know, that supports, that is the livelihood for millions of people, you know, potentially millions will lose their jobs. Small businesses will not survive. And we've seen this huge wave of panic hit the industry. And so I think it's safe to say that it's one of the industries that is the hardest hit by this crisis. Essentially, our freedom of movement and our human interaction will forever and fundamentally change. So it's not just like so many other crises that we've overcome and survived as tourism and travel, and there's been plenty. This one brings a fundamental change, because tourism ultimately is about the exchange of experience, human interaction, and touch. And that experience, we need to rethink the whole thing. And I think for many, it's very hard to rethink it, because they literally don't know if they'll be able to survive long enough to get creative and innovative. So, you know, it's very important to understand the dilemma for many. It supports an incredibly fragile and rich ecosystem of small businesses that are utterly dependent on tourism. And as a long-haul destination, we've been very dependent on international travel, with a fairly small, underdeveloped domestic market. So it's safe to say that the domestic market will be the first to recover. But the reality is that South Africans, you know, we don't have much disposable cash to go on a holiday now. And for many people, you know, travel and tourism has always been far out of their reach, and has not been part of our culture in South Africa to travel. So we've got to understand that domestic tourism potentially will not be enough to sustain our tourism economy.
Yeah.
And then we have to really look very hard at this concept of trust, because health and safety is now going to be paramount importance for people. And how do we win over the trust, not just of fellow travelers, but also of government, who's put us at the very last on the line of businesses that will be opened up again in terms of economic post-lockdown. So it's not just about telling visitors that it's safe to visit and we've put all the social distancing and all the regulations and restrictions in place. It's also about persuading government that we can approach it differently from a risk perspective. So it's really this commodity of trust I speak about often. And it's going to become more and more important, not just from a traveler perspective, but also in terms of how we engage with government and how we engage as a sector with each other. You've spoken already about the importance of collaboration. I think that's definitely something that's coming out very strongly. The tourism sector, like many other sectors, has operated in silos for a long time. And now more than ever before, it's crucial for us to reach across the sector, not just between tourism, but also of sectors outside of tourism. The digital revolution, I've been working on a wine tourism webinar over the last few days, and we've seen huge growth in online wine sales globally in our competitive markets. But of course, in South Africa, with the lockdown and the restriction on alcohol sales that will now hopefully be lifted from the 1st of June, we're far behind. So it's an opportunity for us to really relook the way in which we do business. Sustainability comes to play, and how we really start looking at the tourism has on the world, on local communities, on the people working within this ecosystem. And then an important thought about how we not just put in place mechanisms to safeguard visitors, but very importantly, how are we safeguarding our staff and the teams working and we expect to welcome visitors? Are we looking after them? Are they feeling safe and well looked after and encouraged enough to be welcoming visitors on our behalf as brands? So that's a very important point. And then lastly, how do we really start working cleverly with our communication. The worst thing to do now is to go silent. We need to reach people at home where they are now, speak to their state of mind, win over their trust, and compel and inspire them to visit us when it's safe to do so.
Thank you, Mariette. Yeah, I think you've put it very succinctly. I like the emphasis on trust because essentially in order to be able to feel comfortable with any experience, trust is an essential. It seems to me though, yes, I think local, we're going to be looking to local, but ultimately we have to stimulate the economy. So for me, that's the absolute number one. And I'd really like to go over to you, Hilary, and speak to you and ask, I read something just today that the estimate is that for every day of lockdown, we lose 13 billion in revenue turnover. And so obviously coming out of lockdown becomes really critical. What is your sense? Do you think it's enough? What do you think this just moving to level 3 is going to do for us?
I think we're still waiting to see the exact outline of level 3. There's a briefing, as you may know, this afternoon by the National Command Council at 4 o'clock. Certainly the president said all the right things on Sunday evening, and it was really refreshing because I think the transition from level 5 to level 4 was frankly not good. I think it lost a lot of support. We started off well, we went into something which was actually really quite irrational with a whole bunch of regulations which were quite dysfunctional and not only hampered the economy from reopening to some extent because supply chains were just completely dislocated, but also I think lost a lot of public support for the lockdown. So now we're going to level 3, which is with really a much better tone from the president which is much more about treating people like grown-ups, saying to the private sector, bar a few sectors of which tourism is one and restaurants and sporting events and crowd scenes are another, bar those exceptions, you can reopen as long as you can keep safe and you take responsibility for keeping workers safe, for keeping customers safe, for testing, for screening. And that's quite important, is giving the private sector the responsibility and the incentive to reopen safely. So I think we are waiting to see whether level 3 is a little bit more rational than level 2 and more works better, and how far it will start to reopen the economy. Business, as you may know, had called for a rapid transition to level 2. And until we get to level 2, I think we don't get a real reopening. But having said all of that, I mean, we do need to start looking forward to exactly the kinds of reforms that people have spoken about. And in some ways, there's no reason to wait, and we've got models already. Let me just take two, the one which are related, the release of broadband spectrum, which we waited for 10 years. Takes an emergency to get us to release it, and even then temporarily. But that is crucial to the economy of the future. And related to that, with no disrespect to Mr. Maputa's Minister Brian Patel, why we shut economies is an absolute mystery to all. I think there's huge potential here to not only build the online economy, but also to take it into the townships and to make it inclusive and to get delivery and online any way we can. And that's not only getting goods and services to customers, wherever they might be, whether you get it to them in wheelbarrows or in courier services, it's also getting smaller suppliers to bigger markets. And online is the best way to do that. So I think
I love it.
That online, building that, taking advantage of this opportunity to build that online economy is certainly one of the areas where we need to we don't have to wait for the recovery. This is the recovery. We can start now with building a whole lot of innovations that we've really long needed to expand in this country.
Thank you, Hilary. Yes, I particularly like your emphasis on broadband. It's very clear in lockdown, we've all learned that if you don't have access to digital, you can't do business. And really, digital is the new divide. We're no longer separated by geographies, we're separated by digital. So thank you for emphasizing that. I'd like to speak now with you, Gaylor. So, I mean, really, what do you believe are the new ways to do it, the agility? What can we do differently? You've mentioned a couple of sectors already, but what do you think are the key things that we've learned that we now need to do differently?
Yeah, I think it's clear that we know that we can't go back to a business as usual, and we need to do things quite differently, and I think importantly we need to do things differently in all sectors. It's really about an economy-wide and society-wide transformation that we're looking at. I think we must be quite wary of supposed silver bullets and saying, if we unlock that sector, it will solve our problems. It's not going to be like this. We really need to have really a cross-cutting transformation. I think I mentioned renewable energy because I think it is just really at the core of that transformation in many respects. Unlocking vast investment from the private sector for large-scale plants, but also unlocking the potential of small-scale embedded generation for households as well as communities. And this is really critical in really getting to an energy security that is also affordable and that is clean. So I think that's really one area where I think we have a massive opportunity in the country. Another one for me where it's critical that we put a lot of emphasis, and I've mentioned it, is water and sanitation. This is a sector which is in crisis, in huge crisis. I mean, we're talking about 40% of the water getting lost into the system, huge losses, and still lack of access to water and sanitation in the country, which remains really shredded by inequality. We could put a lot of emphasis into this. These are local jobs. They are win-win in terms of, yes, they do require some investment, but the savings in the long run are so huge that basically they pay for themselves. And they can be done through a nice partnership between the public and the private sector.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Thank you, Gaylor. I mean, I like that. I like the idea of really stimulating local infrastructure development in order to create jobs. I think that has to be a key. So yeah, thank you. Really useful input. So really over to you, Joseph. I think that you speak in your role particularly to manufacturing and local manufacturing. And as I said, it seems to me that for us to turn this around, to be able to balance the books, to be able to deliver the kind of social benefit that we'd all like to do, we have to stimulate the economy. And local manufacture is one of those. I mean, what are your thoughts particularly about local manufacture? Are there sectors that the DTI is focusing on, or are there sectors that you're seeing in your special economic zones that could really be these nuggets for new growth in the future?
Yeah, no, thanks. I think I want to say, I mean, honestly, as South Africa, we've always shown that we can be leading in terms of manufacturing. I mean, as you know, we created, Sasol was created in South Africa through beneficiation and so forth. So we have an opportunity to, as I said, to reindustrialize the economy. We have the opportunity to work together, to unblock some of those blockages that might be making us not to be competitive. Whether it's infrastructure development, as one of the panelists mentioned, development of infrastructure, especially in your marginalized areas, your township areas, rural areas, and so forth, so that we ensure that the producers in those areas are able to have easier access to the market, but also ensuring that we stimulate economic activities in those marginalized peripheral areas of our countries. So I think we do have that opportunity, the infrastructure development, the ICT sector. I think it's going to be very important. E-commerce and so forth. So I think we need to ensure that we work together to capacitate, especially the small businesses, the emerging businesses, so that they, they take advantage of that, the opportunity that will be presented by this COVID, but also post the COVID. Things are not going to be normal. Things are not going to be the same. I think the e-commerce and so forth is going to be more important. The textile production of the PPEs, for example, that also provide an opportunity. And as I said, we need to start rethinking how our value chains are structured. You cannot have, the situation where in South Africa, business to business is most by and large between large and large business. And we need to say that how do we include the small businesses into the value chain, as part of ensuring that some of those structural issues that we created, can start to be dealt with if we open up the economy to the broader population. So I think we do have an opportunity really to start to open up the economy and to start to be working together to ensure that we become competitive.
Thank you, Jacob. I mean, from my perspective, as a small supplier, as a small business specialist, I really believe that it's about efficiency, it's about agility, it's about using digital. It's really, everything has to come together for us to be world class. We need to develop a local manufacturing, a local supply chain, but we can't do it sitting on our laurels and feeling sorry for ourselves. We have to reach world class standards. And I would agree with all of the speakers previously that collaboration is certainly one way to do that. Mariette, for you, where do you think collaboration, how important do you think collaboration is in regenerating the tourism market? I mean, you've been maybe particularly focusing on the first wave of local tourists.
It's absolutely crucial. We have a glimmer of hope here, and it's twofold. The one is particularly in terms of how we woo and win over the local market. The South Africans are desperate to get out, and there is a love for our country. We also have an incredible diversity of offering. And one of the things that we often take for granted in our country is our space, our natural space, of course. So it's absolutely lends itself beautifully to social distancing in many cases. And it's an opportunity, particularly for rural destinations, to really put themselves out as the ideal escape for people who want to get away safely, and with people that we've missed dearly. And just that wonderful thing about being together, breaking bread together, enjoying and catching up and exchanging stories is important. But how we win over the local market and persuade them to travel is very important. We need to bring in diversity of voice. Our marketing in many cases is still the perfect veneer of English and very kind of Western world in how we promote and market destinations. We've really got to break it down and start telling our tourism story in the vernacular of locals and talk the local language. Make sure that we're very sincere. Price is an important point, how we add real value. We don't want to cheapen our tourism product, but we have to listen to what the market is telling us in terms of our value proposition. And then women play an incredibly important role in choosing destinations and where we go and how we travel. So how are we speaking to women, reaching women at home now? And we don't just want to get a new recipe and do cooking and bake banana bread. It's, women think beyond that. So it's very important to really start understanding, the state of mind of our consumer and our customer and our future traveler. And then digital, how as small businesses, we now start collaborating and creating small networks within that value system. So we can put together a proposition that is not just a safe one, but a really desirable proposition of great value as well. There's something that I want to add called digital debt. People think, oh my goodness, it's never too late to start and get onto this digital bandwagon. And I really want to reiterate the points made that digital is really important, how we present ourselves there, because if we don't jump on that wagon now, there will come a time where it's too late to play catch up.
Thank you. Thank you, Mariette. Yeah, I think those are very useful points. So I think let's just have a wrap up. I think it's been a really, we're really touching on some very interesting points. And I'd like to ask you, Hilary, maybe for your last thought, a solution or maybe the solution in your mind that you can put out there that will be the game changer that could put us on the path to the kind of recovery that we absolutely need in South Africa.
I don't think there's a single solution, but I think there's an approach, and that's what matters. And we've talked about the collaboration, and in particular, the much greater cooperation that we've seen between government and the private sector. Now, a successful recovery needs to really build on that. And we need a government that is less about regulating the private sector to do things and more about how is it that we empower and enable the private sector to invest, to do business, to innovate, to get us out of this? And really, it needs a very different approach. If anything, we've learned from the lockdown that you can't, a modern economy is a very dynamic thing. You can't like second guess the market. You can't regulate every single sector. You need to open and you need to collaborate with the private sector to enable investment. And that is going to be more important than ever, given that government already had no money and is going to have even less coming out of the crisis. It is going to have to be a private sector driven recovery. And I think that the collaboration and the talking that we have seen, I hope, is a basis on which to build a different kind of relationship, which could be more successful in stimulating the kind of investment that will create jobs and raise our rate of economic growth.
Lovely, thanks very much. Thank you, Hilary. So over to you, Jacob. What do you believe is maybe, as your closing comment, what do you think is the one thing that we should be doing, one solution that we can bring?
Yeah, no, thanks. Our role obviously as government is to make policies and to ensure that our policies create a conducive environment for business, for the private sector to thrive. And we will continue to do that during this COVID and beyond. The role of the private sector is to ensure that working together with the government, we implement those policies that obviously most of or all of them go through a consultation process. The other thing that I want to emphasize, as I said, is that let us work together in developing the small business in particular, identifying opportunities within various value chains where we can be able to mainstream the small businesses. Let us start to increasingly localize some of the things that where we have a competitive advantage, so that we can be able to have greater production and in the process be able to create jobs. Work together towards creating more Black industrialists in various sectors of the economy. And overall, I think let's work towards a common objective and ensuring that we together attract investment in the economy, very much investment that we need to be able to ensure that the economy recover very quickly. Thank you very much.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jacob. So in fact, you and Hilary on the same track there is to say, let's work together to make sure we create an environment that attracts investment, because we need investment in order to be able to stimulate this economy, to be able to create the jobs and have the, have the kind of country that we all dream of. Mariette, over to you. What do you believe is the one solution, the one positive that we could take out of this?
Look, people will travel. For many of us, it's a fundamental right to travel and to move. It's very important now to be top of heart and not just top of mind, and to take care of each other and build relationships now of trust between regions, between businesses within this value chain, staff and our customers, who's around us, who's within an hour or two radius around us at the moment, and embrace what we have. Embrace our space, get on the digital bandwagon, make sure you are top of heart, as I said, and that you are busy talking to your customers now, and then work with what you got. Some people are really worried that they have to invest a lot of money now in future fitting their business physically and building new things and changing things. Work with what you've got. Get creative, work together, find solution makers along with yourself, and come up with new products and experiences will shape a kind of tourism that's not just good for the environment and for people, but that will also help you thrive post-lockdown.
Excellent. Thank you, Mariette. Over to you, Gaylor. And in actual fact, I'm going to pose you a question. One of our listeners has put forward, and they're posing a question to say, with the exchange rate where it is, why are we not just pumping out local manufacturing for export? This seems like the ideal opportunity to stimulate local manufacturing. So maybe as a closing comment, what would you like to say to that?
Yes, I think, there is tremendous opportunities. I mean, I think just before that, for me, our recovery strategy needs to meet kind of 4 criteria. First, it needs to be local, focusing on our local strengths. It needs to be inclusive. We cannot afford to ignore that. We have a very unequal society, and any sort of operation that we target should support inclusive development. It should be climate resilient, and it should be low carbon. And in that, there are many opportunities going forward. Some of them are definitely in manufacturing, providing there is demand, of course. It's all easy to say we must export. There must be demand. We know that demand is very low at the moment for numerous commodities and products. But I think as the economy restarts, our weak exchange rate will definitely help us in seizing those export opportunities, providing we make sure as well that we transition to a more sustainable economy. Because many countries, particularly in Europe, are now starting to look at this as a key criteria. If you're too carbon intensive, we're not going to buy from you. So I think it's important that we look at this as well. And in closing, I just wanted, you asked for key solutions. I said it, I don't think there is a silver bullet, but I think we can look at a number of initiatives. One I mentioned is really building the kind of networks that we need around, smart grid, smart system, ICT was mentioned a lot, but also maybe a green housing program, a la RDP, And lastly, I think we need a good emphasis on a public employment program based on, really our natural environment and our communities. That's really, I think, critical so that we can respond to the social imperative as well as unlock investment from households and the private sector.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you to all of you. I think what I take away from this is that really it's about collaboration. It's about working together, public and private sector, certainly, but also being realistic. The future is that globally there's less money circulating. We have to be more efficient. We have to be more effective. We definitely have to rapidly deploy a broadband right across the country. And certainly things like the renewable sector gives us great hope for the possibility of stimulating more local manufacture. So I think that there are threads of opportunity. It's the case of really doing things differently and taking this crisis and learning from it, maximizing the lessons that it's taught us. And those lessons are that the past is gone and we need to create the future. So I'd like to thank everybody on the speakers. I've been really delighted. I've enjoyed this discussion. Thank you so much. And I'd like to encourage you and all of the people who joined us to go to the website Supply Development Awards, so stawards.coza,